Today I'm in the bluegrass state of Kentucky, and I'm starting my day at the Cumberland Gap National Park. The Cumberland Gap is a natural gap through the Appalachian Mountains where the states of Tennessee, Virginia, and Kentucky meet. The gap was long used by Native Americans, but became the original gateway to the West when frontiersmen like Dr. Thomas Walker and Daniel Boone led early settlers through the gap to establish settlements west of the mountains in Kentucky. I began my visit at the park's visitor center, where I viewed a short film that documents the early history of the area and toured the small museum. Then, after picking up my park map, I was back in the car for the 4-mile drive to the Pinnacle Overlook. It should be noted that the road to the overlook is very steep and winding, and vehicles over 20 feet in length are not permitted. After arriving at the parking area, it's an easy quarter-mile walk out a paved path to the actual overlook. At slightly more than 2,400 feet, the Pinnacle Overlook affords you an outstanding view of the 3 states, along with Fern Lake, the towns of Middlesboro, Kentucky, and Cumberland Gap, Tennessee. After enjoying the view from the Pinnacle Overlook, it was time to make my way back down the mountain and continue on west toward my next stop in Corbin, Kentucky. The small town of Corbin, Kentucky is located near the intersection of Interstate 75 and U.S. Highway 25, about 25 miles west of the Cumberland Gap. It was here, in this small town, that one of the most well-known and iconic restaurants got its start. Located on Old Highway 25, just south of the Cumberland Gap Parkway, is the original Sanders Cafe. This cafe and tourist court was owned by Colonel Harlan Sanders from 1940 to 1956, and it was here that the Colonel developed his secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices for what would become known as Kentucky Fried Chicken. Colonel Sanders moved to Corbin in 1930 and operated a service station across the street from this location. When tourists would stop for gas, the Colonel started serving them meals in his kitchen, located behind the service station. This practice became so popular that in 1937, he built a cafe across the street where the current cafe now stands. But in 1939, the original cafe burned down. The Colonel immediately rebuilt and opened the current building in 1940. Being a smart businessman, Colonel Sanders not only rebuilt the cafe, but also added a motel. Business boomed, as he not only could feed the hungry travelers, he could offer them a room for the night. It was here in this kitchen that Colonel Sanders not only developed a secret recipe for his famous fried chicken, he developed a new method of preparing it. In the early 1940s, Colonel Sanders started using a pressure cooker to prepare his fried chicken. Each pressure cooker order could be served in about 10 minutes as opposed to 30 to 40 minutes using the old-fashioned pan-fried method. This method, along with the secret recipe, became known as Kentucky Fried Chicken, and as the Colonel was fond of saying, it's finger-licking good. This small space just off the kitchen served as Colonel Sanders' office. It was here that he would tally the day's receipts and launch one of the world's largest fast food restaurants. Today, part of the cafe is operated as a modern KFC fast food restaurant, but a small part of the building is preserved as a museum, which features the original kitchen, a replica motel room, and a number of artifacts that once belonged to the Colonel. In addition to being a Kentucky tourist attraction, the Sanders Cafe was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1990. There's no charge to visit the museum, and there's plenty of on-site parking. But don't expect anything special if you choose to eat at the modern KFC. The service is slow, and the food is no different from any of the others. Moving on from Corbin, my final stop of the day was at the Fort Boonesborough State Park near Richmond, Kentucky. Here on the banks of the Kentucky River, frontiersman Daniel Boone established Fort Boonesborough in the spring of 1775. By that summer, the fort consisted of 26 one-story log cabins and 4 blockhouses, and became a fully self-sustaining town behind the stockade walls. Outside of the stockade walls, the settlers raised crops and tended livestock. They were able to take fish from the nearby river and hunt game from the woods. But life was hard on the western frontier, as the settlers had to repel numerous Indian attacks, the most serious of which took place in September 1778. The attack on the fort was led by Chief Blackfish, who was a Shawnee war chief that was aligned closely with the British. In the months prior to the attack, Daniel Boone was captured and held by the Shawnee, but shortly before the attack on the fort, Boone escaped and led the defense of Fort Boonesborough. The attack and siege of the fort lasted for 10 days, and when it ended, Boone was charged and tried for being a British agent. He was acquitted, but soon left the fort and moved his family farther west, settling in Missouri. Today, the site of the original fort is unknown. Several attempts have been made to discover any evidence of the original fort, but so far, they have failed. Today, a reconstructed fort has been built on the banks of the Kentucky River and is part of the Fort Boonesborough State Park. Tourists can visit the fort for a small fee, where they can see the one-room cabins where the settlers lived, the blockhouses that served as the store and tavern, and they can also see volunteers dressed in period clothing providing demonstrations of blacksmithing, candle making, and cooking. Many of the settlers who occupied the fort had a specific trade, like a weaver, who would make and repair clothing for other settlers. Perhaps one of the most important people in the fort was the storekeeper. He would store and dispense the limited supplies that would arrive by wagon during the spring and summer months. The storekeeper would also serve as the tavern keeper, selling drinks like rum and ale and homemade Blue Thunder. There were very few people at the fort the day I visited, so I was able to talk with a number of the volunteers. One thing that I learned was that despite what you see on TV, Daniel Boone actually hated a coonskin hat and never wore one. The founder of Fort Boonesborough died on September 26, 1820, at the home of his youngest son, Nathan, near Defiance, Missouri. He was almost 86 years old. He was originally buried in an unmarked grave on the farm owned by his daughter Jemima. In 1845, the remains of Daniel and Rebecca Boone was thought to have been moved from Missouri and reinterred in the Frankfort Cemetery in Frankfort, Kentucky. However, some claim that the wrong remains were moved and that Daniel and Rebecca still rest in Missouri. This concludes my visit to some of the sights of eastern Kentucky. If you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up below. If you want to keep up with my future travels, please subscribe. But for now, it's time for me to head on down the road and see what's around the bend.